Welcome to the Mason Guard Show. Unscripted, uncensored, unapologetic. Hello and welcome to the Mason Guard Show. I am your host, Scott Mason. Along with me for the ride is my co-host, Edward Guard.
Hello.
Hey. Welcome to the very first podcast for the Mason Guard Show. We're glad to have you guys along for the ride as we start up this podcast where we're going to talk about a variety of topics, whether it's movies, video games, news, politics, science, whatever catches our attention that week. That's what we're going to be talking about. Today's show is sponsored, of course, by nobody. But if you're feeling adventurous, we'd love to have you along for the ride. Going into today's show, we're going to be starting one of our new features, and this is called Does It Hold Up? So we're going to look at movies from 15 plus years ago and look back and see with the benefit of time if they still hold up and if they still hold our hearts, or if perhaps some things may be better left in the 90s.
Probably a lot.
Quite a lot probably should be held in the 90s. So yes, before we go on today's adventure, I guess I should introduce the movie that we are going to start out with, a beloved movie for both Ed and I from our childhoods. We're talking about 1990s Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the one directed by Steve Barron of Coneheads fame, we looked up, and also a number of great 80s music videos, such as Aha's Take On Me.
And a lot of other ones, like I lost him. This guy did primarily music videos in his career. Now, when you've got someone doing an independent film who made their fame by music videos, you're going to get an unusual movie, and I think that's what happened with Ninja Turtles. This was an independent film aimed at children that came out really dark and violent.
And we're certainly going to get into that, but I think before we talk about what we thought of the movie, I want to go back to before we hit play. And just real quick, Ed, I want to kind of collect your thoughts on what you expected to happen as you sat down to watch the Ninja Turtles. What were you thinking you were going to see?
So, I love the Ninja Turtles. When we initially talked about watching this movie, I was just excited to watch it. I was thinking about everything I remember from my childhood, watching the cartoons. For me, I was 5 years old when this movie came out. It didn't stop my parents from showing it to me. I loved it. Like I said, I loved the cartoon. But honestly, when I thought back about what I loved about this movie, it wasn't even this movie that I was thinking about.
Was it the second one?
It was the second one. Yeah.
I read the same thing, absolutely, where I'm like, where's this scene?
Yeah.
Oh, this in the next movie.
Yeah, this isn't what I thought it was at all. I loved like the bell scene from number 2 when they jump in with the smoke bombs and steal all the bells.
Absolutely specific scene for me
too. The scene at the beginning, I guess, of the second one where they
mall fight.
Yeah, the mall fight. When he's got the foam bats, etc. So I was looking forward to all of those scenes, and that was not this movie. Not to say this wasn't something that I enjoyed and something I remember from my childhood, but it wasn't the movie I remembered. It wasn't the story I remembered. Now we're talking, I've probably seen this movie a half dozen times as a child, but it really wasn't the movie I thought. Like, it wasn't what I was excited about seeing.
Right. No, absolutely. I remember thinking, before I watched this, I thought back, and I remember, for me, this was the movie that changed the Turtles. Like, I loved the show, so that was certainly my introduction as well. I didn't read the comics. I don't know about you, but just so mainly the show, right?
Show, yeah.
So I was a Leonardo fan from the show because he was the leader.
Yeah.
But this movie came out, it was instantly Raph. Right? Yeah. From this point on, Raph became the cool one. And so Raphael became my favorite Ninja Turtle. And I was thinking about that and like how much I expect to cringe going into this movie, going and looking at this guy who's so cool, quote unquote cool, and seeing how he was going to hold up. And that kind of came true.
Yeah. I also want to talk about another thing that I was looking forward to, which wasn't in this movie at all either, was like the punishments that they would get in the second movie, like the backflips and the backflip push-ups and stuff, and like how he's like sitting there clapping and gets busted. Like those were the scenes. So it's disappointing.
You really had
I
very
really
specifics in mind.
remembered Ninja Turtles 2. Turns out that's right. That's the movie I love. All right.
All right. Well, let's get into this one then.
Yeah.
So we'll start off. We have our kind of standard categories that we'll go through. So first off, if we're talking about the story of this movie, so I guess for those of you who don't remember, Ed, do you want to kind of give a quick summary of the basic plot?
So if you don't know the Ninja Turtles, you're probably listening to the wrong podcast. Like if you don't know the basis of the Ninja Turtles, they were, turtles. They got covered in news. They became the Ninja Turtles. That's the standard story of Ninja Turtles. But this one, the story is introduced by a crime spree across the city by the standard Foot Clan, and the Turtles kind of start to engage that problem. Is the overall premise of the story.
Yeah.
That was basically where the movie kind of takes off, and then it obviously goes into the major plot line, which is their sort of antagonist, which is Shredder, and how they're going to sort of counter him.
Yes, and the evil Foot Clan and their crime spree, which brings me to, honestly, the first line I loved from this movie was a crime spree where thieves are stealing everything from skateboards to stereo systems. And if that doesn't speak 90s movies aimed at children, I don't know what does. I couldn't help but laugh at the thought that that's the big crime spree, is, oh no, they're getting our skateboards and our stereos.
Yeah, I think one of the scenes in the opening that made me laugh properly out loud is that woman sitting on her balcony watching like a 4x4 TV and someone steals it right from in front of her. Like, classic sort of, on the spot robbery.
Yeah. So for me, I think my issue with the story is it actually gets really muddled for a kid's movie that's about 4 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Suddenly, it became about a kid. And that for me was what I completely forgot the existence of the Danny character. Yeah. So for those who don't remember, Danny is the son of April O'Neil's boss. And first half of the movie, he's barely mentioned. There's a couple throwaway lines. But then towards the second half of the movie, he becomes a crucial point where he's involved in Splinter's escape. He flip-flops back and forth from each side 3 or 4 different times. And it's his introduction to me that made me realize how messy this whole story actually goes towards the end of it.
Yeah, it really is. And let's be honest, Danny's kind of a piece of shit.
Our first introduction to him, he's literally stealing money from April O'Neil, right?
And then he returns that, what was it, a 10 or a 20 at the end, and you're supposed to be like, oh, he's actually a good guy. But, he's also responsible for giving them up twice. Like, he starts to try and help the second time, but just gives them away again.
Yep.
He's really just the worst person in the whole story.
Yep.
He's just bad. But I do want to talk about the story a little bit more, because the way they portray the Foot Clan is so awesome that when I was a teenager, I totally would have joined. Their clubhouse looks so amazing that I would definitely want to hang out there, especially if I was, a 14 or 15-year-old boy. I mean,
teenage me got a bit jealous looking at all the arcade cabinets they had.
Yeah, 100%. That was an awesome clubhouse, and it really disappointed me at the end of the story when the Foot Clan just, gave that up. And they're like, you want to check out, Building C or whatever it was at the end. They're just oh, crime over.
They really did just flip on their family real quick after one Splinter speech. That's pretty much it. That's all it took.
This isn't a family, says Casey Jones. We'll get into Casey Jones.
I was going to say, because there's another issue for me is, the inclusion of Casey Jones felt unnecessary, but I love it. Simply because of Elias Koteas.
Amazing.
He's the only one who doesn't know what movie he's in, because he is giving it his all in this performance, and he absolutely carries it for me in that regard. Casey Jones is the highlight of this movie as far as I could tell, honestly.
Yeah, I completely agree. The scene when he's weird scene when they go to the country house,
Oh yeah,
which seems completely out of place. Like, it takes a movie that is not moving very quickly. It starts to ramp up, and then they just shut that down and go out to the country for
a little quiet
time.
Yeah,
a little break. Because Raph is, I don't know, in a coma. I'm not really sure. And then they put him in a bathtub, which I understand he's a turtle, but like
the position they put him in that bathtub is super awkward. He is face down, two limbs hanging out the side.
Yeah, and then not Rachel. Oh my God, April comes in and she's like, kind of like pours some water over him, like he's like a fish out of water. And I'm just not sure, like, do the turtles need water still? Do they sort of?
What are the first aid needs of a turtle?
Yeah.
Is that a special St. John's ambulance course?
Because nobody's really doing anything to help him.
Nope.
It is a children's movie, so he's not like cut up or anything. Like, he's not bruised. Like, I'm just really not sure what's wrong with him at that point. He's just not with it. I really did enjoy the banter between Casey Jones and Donatello when they're in the truck.
Oh, yeah.
When they're just giving, they're doing the alphabet game, insulting each other. I thought that was really fun.
When I saw that scene, I was actually like, man, if they made that movie now, I would ship a Casey Jones Donatello relationship. I think that would be something that you'd see in a movie today, and I think that would be an adorable couple. Except for the fact that we find out later in the movie Casey's extremely homophobic.
Right. I didn't want to bring that up. When he throws out claustrophobia and takes that for homosexual, I was like, ooh, that was. I didn't really see that. It wasn't really necessary. It was kind of
It really was an out of place joke.
Yeah, it just didn't feel right. You're a kids movie, and then all of a sudden you're making commentary on, stuff that's outside of that spectrum. But there's a lot of things about this that I want to talk about that falls into the aesthetic as well, which is the next section. But, the way that we're going to do this is we're going to give a score in 5 different categories. The first one being story.
Yeah. So should we do a story score now?
Yeah, let's do a story score.
All right. So again, I think the fact that it's so muddied for me towards the end. The inclusion of Casey Jones, which again, although he's the highlight, is wholly unnecessary, other than for some Casey Ex Machina at the end of the movie. So I think again, I can't give this any more than a 2 out of 5 for me.
Yeah, that's where I felt too. I think that I'm giving it a 2 because I like the Ninja Turtles as well. I don't think that there's no surprise. There's no real twist. Yeah. There's no real story here. It really is just throwing the Ninja Turtles into the live action.
Well, that's it.
Spectrum,
it's a simple, clean setup, and again, it just kind of falls apart towards the end. That's why it doesn't get a 1 for me, because I do like. Again, that first half hour, I think there's some really great stuff in there. It just kind of, again, falls apart towards the end. So let's jump to aesthetic then. Again, clearly 90s when it comes to our fashion and stuff like this. But I was laughing as I watched this movie and realized that for me, for the longest time, this became the basis of what New York City was. I absolutely formed my opinion of what New York was like, and the crime and people stealing skateboards and stereo systems left, right, and center was based on this for about 5 to 6 years before then I eventually actually went to New York and was like, oh, not quite the same.
Yeah, they really portrayed the city as a dark place. Like, they did a lot of dark scenes, like especially when they returned to the city after the farmhouse and sort of that rainy scene, and it was like almost like a film noir sort of area. Like it was always dark. It was always sort of dingy, run down. Every area of the movie was like that. And then when you look at the way they showed like the sewer system was almost like a dungeon, and it was like massive, and
there's actually some great shots in the sewers for me. I think when you have the invading Foot Clan, and it's just a shot of like 20 of them just kind of running down the sewers,
jumping into the sewers.
Some great shots where they play with shadows and stuff like that. Definitely with the film noir tropes for sure.
Yeah, and the scenes when they're like skateboarding out or skateboarding through the tunnels was super interesting as well. Like typical, like really like throwback to the cartoon, because that was a big deal for them. I didn't like that I like that they didn't try and overdo that too much.
True.
They really didn't try and make them superheroes. which I thought was in like they didn't have superpowers. They weren't overwhelmingly winning their fight scenes.
No, they were just turtles who learned kung fu.
Yeah, they were just like, martial artists in fights against people who are, training in the Foot Clan.
Also martial artists, yeah.
Like, yeah. So I thought it was really good that they did it that way. I thought it was very dark. I think the decision to go so dark for a film that was aimed at children was an interesting choice. I really like what you said about how it set your sort of perception of what New York was, because it did for me as well. Like, that's how I viewed the big city.
The big
from
city,
that,
right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was an interesting way to do it. I think that it missed the upbeat sort of nature of New York City, which I think that they portrayed in number 2 so much better. Like, I remember, because I think when we were talking about this movie initially, I was excited about the opening scene where you see everyone eating pizza.
Yeah.
And it's just
which is not in this movie.
Super lively and upbeat scene at the start of the movie, but it wasn't in this movie, of course, which was, again, disappointing because I was looking forward to that one. Yeah, but the aesthetic was interesting. It was an interesting direction that they went. It was very dark, and not what you'd expect from a children's movie these days. There wasn't the bright colors that they engage with, and like the exciting
quick action,
costumes.
distraction.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And even when you talk about like the scenes with Splinter, I found as a kid, I slept through those scenes, and again I found now, even going back, those were actually some of my more interesting scenes. He actually was saying something. And then aesthetic wise, I think the other thing obviously we have to touch on is the special effects, right? We go from the rubber suits of the Ninja Turtles themselves to the animatronics or puppetry, I guess, of Splinter, right? That was an actual Jim Henson creation, which he did as a favor to the director, Steve Barron himself. I was actually reading this. And then actually afterwards was upset because the movie was too violent for him.
Yeah.
Appropriately Jim Henson, right?
Yeah.
But I loved the look of Splinter in this movie. Even now, again, I think if this were now and we were looking at a CG Splinter, I haven't seen any of the recent Turtles movies, so I don't know what that looks like, but I can't see it having the same heart that this Splinter does. When he's chained up towards the end of the movie and his eyes are watery and red, and like there's just something about that I don't think CG truly captures.
Yeah,
and it's that physical presence.
I don't think they would have been able to, but it was super interesting to me that however it is that they managed to achieve that, like that was really there. That was really filmed. It wasn't like someone touched that up. That was the actual puppet that they created for that scene, which I found super interesting as well. I know that a lot of the animatronics throughout it were unusual, but I did like the way, for the time, I did like what they achieved. The fact that it wasn't clearly someone in a costume was good for the time.
The turtles are impressive, because it really could have easily looked like a person in a suit, but like the mouth movements, they put time and attention into that, and you can it pays off in this movie. The one thing that I do think absolutely looks awful, though, is when they cut back to baby Splinter in his cage doing kung fu and karate. It's so bad. It's so stilted. It just looks absolutely awful. So, of course, nothing's perfect. But again, I look at this and go, this is why I prefer these real visual effects over CG every time. So, all right, so that's what I got about aesthetic. Is there any other points you want to touch on, or should we give this a score now?
Yeah, the only other thing is the flashback scenes. I know we touched on the one with Splinter, were really uncomfortable. There was one particular scene when Splinter's talking to Danny, and it kind of like fades away to just focus on Danny, and then it cuts back to like what looks like an old sort of TV screen when they're telling the story. It was just, I think that it wasn't done well. But, overall, I thought they did an interesting job, but it was really dark. I mean, from a scoring perspective for this one, I was torn, but I ended up giving it a 3.
A 3, okay. That's actually where I ended up as well. Because I think, again, the special effects do elevate it a little bit in my mind, but in the end, the action scenes in those rubber suits do suffer for it, right? Yeah. That can't hold up to today's, a John Wick, if you will, right? Like, I again was reading that they filmed it in a slower speed so that they could speed it up to make it at least look fairly fluid. And it does for the most part, but it still doesn't hold up to a today's action standard, I don't think.
I feel like we didn't even touch really on action, like the fight scenes there. Like we focused so much on the overall like imagery of the movie, but we didn't like
aesthetics would be
it was not
right?
good from a fighting perspective. Like, it was not a good martial arts movie.
Let's
like,
say an aesthetic. Let's say an aesthetic.
Like the fighting in the movie was not great. I mean, there's some clear like whiffs that connect somehow. You know, like the big, you know, there's sometimes when they like touch someone and they flip right over. You know, a lot of the funny sort of, you know, scenes like when he hits him with the cymbals, etc. You know, there was a few scenes like that where the fighting was just not up to standard. Like, I understand they were trying to make it fun and light, and obviously couldn't have any sort of gore, or blood. Of course, that, you know, it is for kids, but I feel like they really did not focus on what those fight scenes would eventually look like. That it wasn't the focus of the movie, and I think it was a big miss because the whole fight part of it from the Ninja Turtles and them winning over those fights is a big part of their sort of intrigue in even the cartoons. And you know, I think that the fighting lacked what it should have been. I know that I think nobody expected it to be as violent as it was for the time, but when I look back on it now, it really wasn't great.
It really is dated. Again, dated, but I still think they managed to have some great moments. I think when Raph falls through the skylight, you know, where is he anyway?
Yeah.
You know, perfect
He'll
timing.
Be here any minute.
That's it. Yeah, just dropped by. So I think again the aesthetic is there, but there are certain things that hold it back from being super fantastic. So let's move on to the next category then. So we talk about, I guess, script or dialogue. And again, with a movie from the 1990s, there's some really, really painful things in this movie for me. The one that jumps out is that most of the Turtles jokes are either bad puns or references to TV and movies from the 50s and 60s. They reference honeymooners, Grapes of Wrath, War and Peace. Like, it didn't fit the teenageness of the Ninja Turtles for me, and you can clearly tell that this movie was written by a 30-year-old even back in 1990.
Yeah, like it was when they were talking about Gilligan's Island. That's a little bit old for me. Like, I kind of followed like their references, but it wasn't. You know, it didn't make sense for the genre. It didn't make sense for the target audience either.
That's it, right? Like, I think, would 9-year-old me have known what honeymooners is?
Mm-hmm.
I still don't know much about honeymooners, so no. Like, you know, and again, you could say those jokes, I guess, were for the parents, you know, to get them in. And, you know, 9-year-old me still loved the movie, so is that a whole? I don't necessarily know. I think, again, it doesn't necessarily hold up by certain today's standards. There's the scene with Casey and April out on
I wanted to bring that one
the porch. Yeah. You know, oh, don't call me honey and stuff like that. And it's again not that it's a bad message, but it comes across so awkward, so jilted. And then the very next scene with them, he literally pushes her down into a chair to give her a massage.
A little uncomfortable, right?
Creepy.
Yeah, a little uncomfortable.
So creepy today now.
Yeah, for some reason the way she was dressed too, and it was just an uncomfortable scene. Although for some reason, when Casey's on that chair and it breaks, the little swing out front, that's a really memorable scene for me. Like
that is a highlight for me.
Like when I think of that movie, that's one of the things that made sense. I feel like at that point too, for some reason, there's like a scene that's out of place in the movie where she comes to him and asks him like, where are the turtles? And he says, oh, they're out training.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then the next scene is Raphael waking up in the bathtub. So they weren't actually out training. Like, you'd have to go back and watch.
I don't think I caught that.
Yeah,
but
so I think that scene was actually clipped out of place in the initial movie. I never noticed it before, but it's they're not out training yet because they haven't gone out with Raph, and they wouldn't leave the house. And it explains that Donatello's just sitting with him, right? Yeah. It was very weird. A lot of the script was strange. We brought up the homophobic joke. There's just a lot of strange scripts throughout it.
Yeah, and that's, I think for me, the fact is just how much of it doesn't hold up. Jose Canseco joke in there, and Cricket in that first Casey Jones fight, which, hey, I love that scene. I think that's one of my favorites. That does still stand out as their first encounter. But again, the dialogue in it is just so 1990. Is really where we find is. So if you're trying to show this to a kid today, I don't know that you would really get that same enjoyment from it based on what they're used to seeing. So
I completely agree. I think the script was lacking. I think the banter piece they tried to put in wasn't perfected enough. But yeah, I thought overall there's a lot of things in there that out of place, wrong market. I did not score the script very well. I ended up giving it a 2 for this section.
A 2 for this section. I actually went even lower with a 1. Again, just how dated it feels to me. I don't think you could put it in today's world and have anyone feel that it belongs. So just I think with that, the only thing I think that carries any relevance to today's world is there's a throwaway line about kids, bury themselves in their Walkmans in this case.
Oh, right, yeah.
That would, modern day parents would probably say, relates to kids and their phones. And there's a throwaway line about immigrants, which I think would be interesting to see how that would float in a movie today. Because it does seem like an intentional thing, because it is saying, these immigrants are the ones who remember what the Foot Clan is and how it's a bad thing. And everyone just kind of dismisses them because they're immigrants. And there's where the problem kind of lies in this. So, again, I can't give this anything higher than a 1 when it comes to the script and how it holds up. Our next category we'll move on to is soundtrack. This will cover more than just, obviously, the songs from the movie. This will cover score and some of the sound design and things of that nature as well. So I will say, again, I think this is where I'm going to sound like you in that I thought I was going to remember some great songs from this movie, and they're all in the second one.
Right.
With the exception of the ending credits, TURTLE Power.
So I want to talk about how terrible that song is. It was very uncomfortable. I forgot it existed. I'm going to even try and play a quick snip of how bad this song is. Let's just... Turtle Power, here we go.
Yeah,
this is the one. I don't know how
Partners in Crime, spelt with a K.
Yeah. So
put that in my trivia next.
So I don't know how well this is picking out.
On the half shell, they're the heroes for. In this day and age, who could ask for more?
This is one of those times I wish we did have a video for this podcast. Right now, he's speaking volumes.
So it was really terrible. I tried to even listen to the lyrics for it. It was really bad. I'm not aware of Partners in Crime. I don't know if they've done anything successful. It was super bad though. That was my opinion on the soundtrack.
I have to disagree, man. I still think that's a banger. I mean, it's a banger in the very sense of the 90s. How many movies had that back then, right? You just had the hip-hop theme song to end the movie. Whether
explaining
it was Ace Ventura had that, Will Smith and the Men in Black.
But it was if you listen to it, it actually dictates the whole storyline of the movie. It's so terrible. If you haven't heard it, please listen to it. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Power from 1990.
Partners in Crime.
With a K. I feel like it was just uncomfortable. It wasn't like it was throughout the movie. It wasn't like that theme was there. I just think it missed the mark for me. I was really missing the classic 80s sort of anthems that really should have been in this movie. I can't even off the top of my head think of what should have been there, but there's so many.
When your most recognizable song is Tequila.
Right. Yeah.
That's, I guess, again, a bit of a weird juxtaposition for this kid's movie where you should have crazy, great, upbeat music. And again, I just feel that it falls pretty flat on that. And I never noticed with every single move, there's a kya, kya, hua, fu, ha, hu, ha, So many noises in this movie, and it's nowhere is that more prevalent than when they are like training out in that woods area, and the four of them are literally just play fighting. It looks like just a bunch of actors in rubber suits. They're just like go out there and play fight with each other, and they made sure to make a noise with every single move.
Yeah, it was
they made
uncomfortable. I mean, there was no like crazy sound effects throughout. I'm sure that there was someone's job to like break lettuce. Or like celery, like to put those over different punches and stuff. But I feel like there's some opportunity to have some like jams in that movie that just weren't there. I mean, it was an independent film. I don't know what the budget for this film was. I'm sure it wasn't high. It came in as one of the highest grossing independent
movies,
films of the time. So I imagine that they didn't expect this to become a cult classic, right? So. Although they obviously did get partners in crime to write a jam for the end that I would like to restate that I was not a big fan of.
Yeah, they do say an estimated budget of $13.5 million. And back in 1990, that's actually a fairly high budget for an indie movie.
I wonder where most of that money went. It probably went all into the costumes. And,
yeah. That does seem like the most likely spot for it. So. The one spot I did like, I don't want to be completely negative on the soundtrack here. The first time when they run into April O'Neil and it is that dark scene, and you have them taking out a few foot soldiers there, I think that's well done because you can still kind of picture what's happening. They do make those sounds and the voices clear enough to do it. I want to ask, just because I feel like you've got something to say about this. I know you love Corey Feldman. So the fact that he is in this movie, I learned this right before watching it, almost basically, through another show, and I couldn't hear it.
You couldn't hear him?
That was what surprised me, was I was listening for him at this point, and I guess Donatello has like 6 lines in this movie. So I just, at no point was I paying enough attention when he spoke to be like, freaking, it is Corey Feldman.
So I did not remember, or I don't know that if I ever knew he was one of the voices of kids. I don't think that he was relevant to me.
To 5-year-old you, yeah.
Especially as a voice. But so what I did when I watched this movie, I did not look up anything to start because I wanted just a fresh watch of this film. I remembered what I liked about it, which was all Ninja Turtles too. And then when I heard it, I heard his voice straight away. As soon as he spoke, I'm like, oh my god, that's Corey. Now, Corey Feldman, if you don't know him, again, you're listening to the wrong podcast because he's going to be in a lot of the movies that we're talking about. Like, if we're going to watch Lost Boys or any of those ones, this guy is in everything from that time frame. He was a superstar. Both the Coreys.
The two Coreys, man. That was even a TV show of its own.
Yeah, right? So I feel like if we're going to talk about Corey Feldman, I need to bring up his music video. I don't know. Do you know this? I'm not going to play it.
I don't think I do know this.
So
search out.
This is Corey Feldman and Ascension Millennium.
That's a great title.
It's so bad. I don't want to actually judge anybody who listens to this or likes it. I can't imagine anyone's a big fan of it. He tried to make a music video. If you don't know that Corey Feldman has completely spiraled out of control in his life, I'm not going to get into his most recent fame stuff because it touches on topics that I don't necessarily want to get into today. But this music video is so uncomfortable. It's him in his house with a whole bunch of scantily clad women, but it's one solid shot of like him waking up in the morning and doing this.
It's a one take.
Yeah, it's like a one take through his house. It's like he gets up out of bed and like sings, and there's like awkward moments we're out, and the song is super awkward. But if you listen to it enough times, it gets stuck in your head. So absolutely, please, if you're listening to this right now, listen to this music video.
Ascension Millennium. When was this made? When is this music video?
When did this come out? 2014.
Oh, that's way more recent than I
expected.
It's
super recent. Yeah, like it's not child Corey Feldman. Like he's obviously like an older gentleman now. It's super uncomfortable. I want you to watch it. If you want to ask questions or make comments on how crazy it is, I'm happy to hear them and discuss that in more detail another time.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
we've gone down off a little bit of a Corey Feldman tangent there. I just knew I had to get you started on that a little bit. We'll probably talk about him more and more as this show evolves because he's just going to be in a lot of the movies. So what would you give? What's your soundtrack score then? Let's bring this back.
Man, I gave it a 1. There was no anthem in this movie that I could.
Yes, there is.
No, I cannot get behind.
Teamwork,
Partners in Crime.
power, man.
No,
Partners in Crime.
no.
Have track. All right, I give it a 2 because
All
I disagree, man. That last track absolutely saves this soundtrack score only slightly for you. So, and then again, let's bring it back now. Let's kind of wrap this up here as we look about it. So our final category score that we want to talk about is overall enjoyment, because we do feel that even sometimes with movies that do score low in the critical categories of story, aesthetic, script, things like that, they can still be enjoyable movies. So we wanted to kind of keep that separate and kind of have an overall enjoyment score. That said, for me, this movie still kind of rings in fairly low at a 2. I think there is still some fun to be had. The nostalgia does kind of ring true. There's a couple scenes that you're like, oh yeah, I remember that scene. Again, the fight between Casey and Raph at the beginning, I think, is one that always stands out for me. Him crashing through the sunroof is one that will always work for me. And a couple of those shots in the sewers, as I say, I think there's actually some really great shots that just kind of come out of nowhere and then disappears. That vision disappears very quickly. So I give this a 2. Where do you kind of stand on the overall enjoyment of?
I always think it's really important, and we've talked about this before, Scott. Just because a movie is bad doesn't mean I don't like it. If you love movies, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You probably have a shame movie out there that you just love that is garbage. I'm not calling this movie garbage. I'm just saying that it'll be easy for me to put another decade between seeing it again. Yeah. I don't need to watch this movie again. Before someone else wants me to watch it with them. I won't pull this movie up again. I gave it a 2, and I'm giving it a 2 because I do love the Ninja Turtles. I did love this movie when I was a kid. I even considered giving it a 3 because of it took a great cartoon and it really started what I believe was that live action trend for action movies of this kind that were still funny, were still meant for a younger group of people, that weren't overly violent, weren't gory, but still brought fun to sort of martial arts and things like that. So I did give it a 2. I did enjoy the movie though. I just again don't feel like I need to watch it again.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty safe one to say. This isn't one we're going to say, go back and revisit Ninja Turtles because you'll be blown away by how good this movie still is. We certainly say pass on that unless, again, you really want to share it with the younger generation. We'd be curious to see, if you are sharing it with your kids these days, what they think of it. So, if there's, if you've recently watched this with someone for the first time, leave a comment below and let us know kind of how that went. We want to hear from you guys on that regard. So
do though go back and watch Partners in Crime, Turtle Power, and Ascension Millennium because those are worth your time.
Absolutely. I know what I'm doing after this show. All right. Any last thoughts on this that you want to kind of touch on there? I know you talked about the violence, really. I did laugh that at the end of this kid's movie, they literally dump the bad guy into a garbage truck and then compress him. Yeah. That one was a bit of a surprisingly violent one. But again, I looked to today's standards, and in the end, it actually seems pretty tame. I just think, man, back in 1990... I can't believe my mom let me see that,
It was a darker film than you'd expect it to be.
Yeah. All right, so that's our take on Does It Hold Up with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Thank you guys very much for tuning in to the Mason Guard Show. I am Scott Mason.
And I'm Ed Guard.
All right. This show has been sponsored once again by nobody. Hit us up if you are interested in that being your name placed right there. Thank you very much, guys. We will see you in the next one.